So moving on to our final contestants, semaglutide and tirzepatide. Now, you only brought up semaglutide. I'm going to bring up tirzepatide
Let's
because
talk about
it's
GLP-1 agonists in general.
GLP-1
Yeah.
agonists in
Yeah.
general.
Yeah.
So these are pharmaceutical drugs. So this is where pharma stepped in and said, "Hey, there's this stuff called GLP-1. Check out what it does in the human body. This is super cool. Imagine if we could make it stick around longer than a few seconds or a minute. What would the benefits be?" And they hacked away at it, and they deserve credit. Like, they spent the millions of dollars on R&D and figured out a way to extend the half-life of these compounds so that they stick around for days, not minutes or hours, and exert a constellation of effects metabolically on the body that has really done wonders for people who were very stuck in their fat loss journeys. And I will put postmenopausal women in that category because, when we both know, like, you'll meet women who went through menopause and they're doing it all right. They've got it all dialed in, and there's 10 or 15, sometimes 20, sometimes more pounds that they just can't drop. And these compounds are incredible at convincing, and 90% of the time, at convincing the body to just release weight. And the reason for that, I think, is because they act on through so many different pathways. It's not just that you're not as hungry. It's not just that it's basically, it's not just an appetite suppressant, but it is an appetite suppressant because it acts on the food reward system of the brain, which actually turns out it may have some side benefits on people who are trying to stop drinking or smoking or drugs or whatever. It seems to have some applications there, but it also bumps up your resting metabolic rate. It also slows down your gastric emptying, which can cause problems in some people, but definitely you stay fuller longer and you can't eat as much. So we're going at it both sides. And then it also improves your insulin sensitivity. So once you have glucose in the bloodstream, it can get into the cells more easily, and in particular, in skeletal muscle, which should, if you have the right coaching and the right person, make it easier for people to now start exercising again, which is critical when you're using these compounds, right? It has benefits for the brain because it improves insulin sensitivity. And so if somebody's becoming slowly insulin resistant in their brain, and so they've got the brain fog, they're not functioning as well, there's going to be some benefits there. And it's also, GLP-1s are also being studied for treating Alzheimer's in the case where you have an Alzheimer's person who has that type 3 diabetes, if you will, insulin resistance in the brain.
Well, I think semaglutide and GLP, they're interesting insofar as, yes, they do help with, like, obesity is a very complex disease, right? So this is where I've actually also changed and evolved my opinion, where I used to sort of have this sort of nose up in the air, like it's just a willpower thing, just stop eating. And of course, that's completely oversimplifying the problem. So it can really help, as you were saying, with with the reward systems. There does seem to, like, with individuals who are obese, they do seem to have an overactive serotonergic and dopamine, like a reward system, as it relates to food and other behaviors. So often when you see food addiction, you'll see other addictive behaviors sort of in tandem with it. The other thing that's interesting, I was reading a paper the other day on cardiovascular risk, and it does seem to also augment, or we'll say improve, cardiovascular risk, which is also another thing. And I will hammer this home for my women. It's not breast cancer that's going to get you. It's going to be, it's cardiovascular disease. This is the number one killer. Not to say that breast cancer doesn't happen. Of course it does. It runs in my family. But cardiovascular disease is the thing that's going to get most women. It is the number one killer. It's like cerebrovascular and cardiovascular disease. So it's, to your point earlier at the top of our conversation with, like, the, with the nutrient delivery and the bioregulators for the blood. This is also very important. The problem with semaglutide and other GLP-1 agonists is that, like, the weight loss does seem to be, you're losing fat, but you're also losing a lot of muscle mass. So to your point around getting back into the gym and establishing some of these habits of exercise and that mechanical stimulus to the muscle is going to be very important. The other issue.
The other thing I would add to that is nutrition, because you're not going to be able to eat as much. You're not going to, it's going to, as it is, I'm sure you know this better than me. As it is, people are not getting enough protein in their diet to begin with.
Right.
And so now you have less appetite. And so now you really aren't getting enough protein. So essential amino acids and even sometimes BCAAs post-workout becomes critical to the equation. You've got to feed that muscle. You've
Yeah.
got to eat protein first and eat it like it's your job. And make sure you stay hydrated, because guess what? As your appetite diminishes, you just don't care as much about putting things in your mouth,
Mhm.
basically. You don't
Yeah.
want to drink, you don't want to eat that much. So, sorry, I just wanted to
No,
interject
that's
that.
that's a
Yeah.
great point, and I'm glad that you did. And I think the other thing to keep in mind is when you go on a drug that is going to promote weight loss in the way that semaglutide and some of these other ones do, what it also seems to be the case is once you stop these drugs, that some of those, we'll say suppressive effects also disappear, and your body, most people will gain the weight back, and in some cases, we're seeing more so. So your body will overcompensate. So your hunger becomes, because it's been suppressed, will overcompensate for that. So you have to make a decision like, is this something I'm going to be on for the rest of my life? Or am I going to be putting in some, again, like majoring in the majors? Am I going to be making sure that I'm mechanically stimulating the muscle, that I'm prioritizing protein, to your
Mhm.
point, so that, yeah,
It's the way I position it to people is this is an invitation to reconsider your nutrition and lifestyle habits.
sure.
I would say that for most people, well, not most, for many people, if they kind of rebalance their nutrition, if they adopt better lifestyle habits, they get back into exercise. So now the gym becomes a I get to as opposed to I have to. So it becomes a thing that they do and they look forward to it, because let's face it, if you're carrying 50, 60 extra pounds around, nobody feels like going to the gym. You feel like you're tired, you're exhausted, you can't move, your mobility, you're inflamed, all those things. So what we do see happening is as people start to lose weight, it's like, it's like a load's come off and they feel, oh my God, look at what I get to do. And so I think that for a number of people, for a percentage of people, if they've really fixed their diet, if they've really addressed the lifestyle issues that need to be addressed, they can come off of these things and stay off. But sometimes after 6 months, they'll need a little tune up or something. They'll go back on for like a month or two just to and at a very low dose. But there is definitely a portion of the population that seems to need even a prophylactic, like small dose ongoingly. There are some doctors out there who believe that the metabolic benefits are good enough that it actually could be a good thing from a healthy aging perspective to stay on a very low dose long term. I think it's going to come down to the individual. I think we have to be cognizant of the fact that this is a tool, and ideally the ultimate goal should be to use it for good and try to develop habits and maybe use other tools when you come off. Like there's some really good supplements out there that might be helpful in weaning off the GLP-1s. Like I've seen people be really successful with some of the supplements that have a peptide in them called DNF10, which is nowhere near as powerful as the GLP-1 agonist, but might be just enough. Plus, they're combined with like bitter melon and dihydroberberine. Like there's a lot of other good ingredients in there. And so maybe they come off the GLP-1 agonist and now they move on to a supplement like that that helps to keep things more even. But there's no doubt that depending on the individual, if the cravings comes raging back, there may be there probably is a percentage of the population that may need to be on these long term, right? I'm not it's like what you said earlier, anybody who's done any work in this field understands that there are some people that moving less and like moving more and eating less ain't going to cut it, right? So these are
I
people whose
think every
metabolism.
menopausal woman is like, hey, I'm doing the
Oh,
same thing that
yeah,
I did when I
yeah,
was 30, and it is not the
it's not
same.
working.
It's not the
100%.
same. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. But I have seen menopausal women drop the weight, and in some cases, I've seen them keep it off and come off of them.
yeah,
So,
yeah.
I mean, I used it for about a year, and I never gone back to where I was before I started.